I know it is difficult to believe, based on how muscular and athletic I am, that I'm a very clumsy person. Today I dropped an object into a box, and then when I upended the box, the object was not there. I looked all over the place. It's quite an open space. No object. Not in the box, not outside the box. And then, for a split second, I felt as if I were in a dream state, in a dreamscape, surrealistic, divorced from reality. Yesterday, my brother, Shimon, asked me about the famous dream argument or dreaming argument. And today, I'm going to tackle it at length. The video is divided, like everything Jewish, in three parts. The first part is my solution to the dream argument. The second part is the concept of self and how dreams and the dream argument somehow elucidate the problematic nature of our identity, core identity, and supposedly the unitary nucleus that comprises us, that keeps us continuous across time and space. And the third part is a review, an overview of what other philosophers and scholars had to say over the centuries, starting with Aristotle and Plato and ending with much newer voices. I'm afraid that all their solutions are highly problematic. Mine might as well be problematic, I don't know. But at least as far as I know, it's new. And who am I? Who am I to dream aloud? My name is Sam Vaknin. I'm the author of Malignant Self-Love, Narcissism Revisited. I have a PhD in physics and in philosophy, and I'm a professor of psychology. Let's delve right in. The dream or dreaming argument is one of the staples of what is known as epistemological skepticism. When we doubt our capacity to know something for sure. And one of the things we cannot know for sure, according to the skeptics, is whether we are dreaming or whether we are awake. It started with Plato in his Theaetetus. It's a dialogue where Plato raises the issue of how to distinguish a dream state from a wakeful, reality-centered or focused state. Aristotle, in his Metaphysics, carried the argument forward, and the Pyrrhonists brought it to completion. Pyrrhonists were ultra-skeptics. They even doubted doubt itself. Fast forward, 2,000 years? And there's René Descartes. René Descartes was a French philosopher and scholar, and he wrote a book called Meditations. And in Meditations, he raised the same question. How on earth can I be sure that I'm awake and in reality, rather than, for example, dreaming myself awake and in reality? And this is very reminiscent of the Chinese Taoist philosopher Chuang Tzu or Zhuang Zhou, known lovingly as Zhuangzi. He came up with the story of, when I'm asleep and dreaming of a butterfly, am I the one dreaming of the butterfly, or is the butterfly dreaming me? In Mahayana and Tibetan Buddhist traditions, we have philosophers such as Namkhai Norbu, who again make the issue of dreaming a central tenet in their work. Let's make one thing clear to start with. All these philosophers and scholars across the generations and the millennia applied the dream argument only to subjective experiences, not to rational inquiry like mathematics. In other words, 2 plus 2 is 4 is valid in reality and would be valid in a dream, according to them. Where the source of confusion, where the confusion arises, is with regards to how one experiences one's existence and the environment, the world, the universe, and reality. In a dream, you experience yourself and you have the subjective access to reality that you have when you're awake. So how to tell the difference? And this is the dream argument. Now, there have been dozens, literally dozens of solutions and responses proffered and offered throughout the centuries, and I'm going to review many of them in the second half of the video. But allow me grandiosely and with hubris to offer my own small contribution to the debate. Having reviewed all the proposed solutions and responses, I think we need to try some other way. They're not working. And I think we have to resort to the very structure of reality in order to attempt a meaningful response. Maybe not a final one, but definitely a step in the right direction. I think reality is unlike dreams. In other words, I wish to shift the focus from the dreaming mind to the dream itself, from the wakeful person to reality itself, whereas all previous scholars, without a single exception to the best of my knowledge, have asked the question, what's the difference between the dreaming mind, the dreaming person, and the wakeful person? What's the difference between a person who perceives internal reality in the form of a dream to the person who perceives external reality out there? So the focus was on the mind. Whereas I'm trying to shift the focus and ask the question, is there any difference between reality and dreams to start with? Now, if the answer is yes, there is a difference, we can go forward and ask the question, if there is a difference, why don't we perceive it as sharply as we should? And if there isn't a difference, then of course, the reality and dreams are indistinguishable, and it is normal for us to experience both with equal clarity and conviction. So let's start with this. I think there are massive differences between reality and dream states, or dreaming, or dreams. Reality is analytic. Reality is veritable or verifiable by virtue of self-reference and self-containment. This is borrowing from the work of Frege and Carnap, the analyticity idea or sense in the work. Okay, enough with big words. What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that reality does not reference anything. It does not emerge from some kind of relationship or interaction with something outside reality. It doesn't even emerge from interactions and relationships within the components of reality. It is not interactive and is not the outcome of any reaction. It is analytic in the sense that it is verifiable. We know that it exists. No one denies that reality exists. We can have arguments as to the nature of reality, our perception of reality, whether reality is constructed internally or externally. Leave all these aside. We all agree that there is something that we might as well call reality. And in this sense, it's automatically verifiable. But reality is verifiable in reference to itself. The locus of verification is internal. It is reality that verifies the reality of reality. Reality is self-referential and self-contained. If we take the totality of reality, then it is by definition, ipso facto, solipsistic. Again, this borrows from the work of Frege and Carnap and others. I will not go into phenomenology right now. Those of you who wish can leverage this lecture to study more on your own. So this is the first element. Reality is analytic in the Kantian sense. Reality is a priori. It does not depend on experience. Reality does not depend on experience. In other words, even if you do not experience reality, it is out there, at the very least, accessible to the experiences of others. But it is definitely not the outcome of experience. It is definitely not an interaction with experience. It is definitely not created by experience. Even if reality is a totally internalized experience, even if reality is not out there, as some idealists and others claim, even if reality is actually generated in the brain completely as some kind of simulation, if you wish, it is still real. And it is real not as the outcome of the subjective experience, but as the determinant of the subjective experience. This is very important. It's a priori. And in this sense, I disagree vehemently, may I add, with the empiricists, with people like Quine and Wittgenstein, and with others. Finally, I would say that reality is falsifiable. We know this because we create theories of reality. Then these theories or hypotheses yield predictions. Then these predictions are testable, and sometimes they're proven correct, and sometimes they're proven wrong. They're proven wrong, the theory is falsified. So our knowledge of reality is falsifiable. Let's summarize what I've said hitherto. Reality is analytic, it's self-contained, and by definition self-referential, because there's nothing outside reality to refer to. The definition of reality is everything there is. Reality is a priori. It does not depend on experience. It generates experience, even if the whole thing is an illusion or internal. And reality is the knowledge of reality, is falsifiable. When we know, when we have an epistemic relationship with reality, this knowledge is falsifiable. Knowing reality, therefore, involves a single language, the language of reality. This is, of course, what Aristotle said in his Metaphysics. This is Aristotelian metaphysics, that language is reality, and reality is language, in the sense that there is a one-to-one mapping or monovalence between the two. Reality, therefore, is a monolingual phenomenon, a single language phenomenon. Okay, so this is reality. Now let's compare this to dreaming. Dreams are synthetic. Dreams can be verified only by referring to reality. You can verify the content of the dream only by comparing it to reality. You say, the person in my dream is my auntie Jemima. So you're comparing the person in your dream to someone you know or don't know. You're comparing objects in your dream to objects in real life. Everything in your dream makes sense, symbolic or direct, only in reference to reality. Even Freud's work in the interpretation of dreams Freud doesn't claim that the symbolic layer of the dream, this hidden language, is somehow divorced from reality. On the very contrary, he claims that the symbolic language of dream is a pointer to reality, addresses reality, however indirectly. So dreams are verifiable only in comparison to reality, by interacting with reality. And in this sense, they are not analytic. They are not self-contained. They are not self-referential. They are reality referential. And they are synthetic in the Kantian sense. Dreams, as opposed to reality, are also not a priori, they are a posteriori. Dreams depend on and refer to experience. Many scholars argue that dreams are subjective experiences, and others agree that if we were unable to refer to experiences, we would not be able to dream in any meaningful way. In other words, we would not be able to experience dreams as real. It is experience outside dreams, or experience in general, that renders dreams believable and reality-like. In other words, dreams depend on and refer to lived experience. In themselves, they are a form of experience, and they only make sense. They only have the power. They're only empowered via experience. When you're in a dream, all kinds of things are happening, and then it is your lived experience, the accumulation of your experiences, your biography, if you wish, your personal history, that your episodic memory, that makes sense of what's happening inside the dream. The minute you make sense of what's happening inside the dream becomes similar, or according to some scholars, indistinguishable from reality. So we're beginning to see massive differences between reality and dreaming. Reality is a priori. Dreams are a posteriori. Reality is analytic. Dreams are synthetic. Reality is analytic because there's nothing outside reality, whereas dreams are synthetic because there is a reality outside the dreams that gives the dreams the power to appear reality-like, to appear real. And finally, dreams, of course, or the knowledge of dreams, or the experience of dreams, is non-falsifiable. You cannot construct a hypothesis or a theory which would yield predictions which you can then test within the dream. This last point is a bit contentious because lucid dreamers claim that they can do exactly this. They have all kinds of tells, all kinds of procedures to tell them if they're dreaming or if they're awake. But this is exactly it. The fact that lucid dreamers can conduct an experiment, and this experiment tells them if they're dreaming or awake, proves the point that dreams are nothing like wakefulness. That dreams are absolutely not like reality. So even if we were to say that dreams are falsifiable, they are falsifiable in the sense that they are different to reality. In short, whereas reality is monolingual, whereas reality is a single type of language, Aristotelian metaphysics, current physics, they're all single types of languages that try to capture reality and describe it. And there are people who say that reality itself is a form of language. People who go as far as saying that reality is a simulation, and therefore it's a computer code, which is of course a language. So this is reality, but it's always a single language. Reality involves always a single language. Whereas in a dream, you need a minimum of two languages. As Freud had observed, Freud suggested that you need to interpret dreams. You need to convert dreams from the language of dreams, which is symbolic, to the language of reality. That was Freud's approach. I have a similar approach, although I disagree with Freud on these issues, but I have a similar approach where I say that experiencing dreams involve an automatic translation between at least two languages. In other words, you cannot remain embedded in a dream using the dream's language and then wake up and you not needing to translate it. Waking up and recalling the dream always demands translation. That is an observation made also by Walter Benjamin and his famous concept of Edenic language. So the differences between dreams and reality are very massive. And this brings us back to epistemological skepticism. If dreams are so dramatically different to reality philosophically, at least, reality is analytic, dreams are synthetic. Reality is a priori, dreams are a posteriori. Reality is falsifiable. Dreams are either non-falsifiable, or if they are falsifiable, they make even clearer and more profound the difference between dreams and reality. Knowing reality requires a single language. Knowing dreams requires at least two languages and a process of translation. This is an abyss. The difference between reality and dreams is unbridgeable. And yet, why do we experience dreams as reality when we're in them? When we're dreaming, why do we deceive ourselves into believing that we are in some kind of reality? And what I will do now, I will discuss the concept of self and its relationship to dreams and reality, and I will transition from there to review the literature and try to make sense of it all. The very concept of self is dreamlike, not reality-like. Let's have a look at my proposed solution. The self is not analytic, it is synthetic. In other words, the self is not verifiable by referring to reality. The self is not verifiable by referring to itself, is not self-referential. The self is not self-contained. On the very contrary, the self makes sense only by interacting with and referencing reality. Even Freud had said it when he came up with the concept of the ego and the reality principle. There's no self without reality. If we were to take away reality, all other people, all objects, and place a newborn in vacuum, it's highly dubious that that individual would develop a self. And so the self is synthetic, not analytic. The self is a posteriori. It depends on and refers to experience, as Hume had observed. The self is not a priori. In other words, the dependency of the self on experience means that it is not an a priori category. It's not a priori. And finally, the self is non-falsifiable. You cannot falsify yourself. There is no prediction and no test and no experiment that you could conduct that would inform you that you don't exist. Period. Ultimately, you would be the observer, the designer, the scientist, the scholar, the witness. You cannot remove yourself from the equation. The only way to falsify the self is essentially to commit suicide. As long as you're alive and kicking and thinking, there is no possibility to construct a theory or hypothesis that would yield falsifiable predictions. Period. So, clearly the self is much more like a dream than reality. It's not real in any meaningful sense. Consequently, when we deal with the self, we always need to translate from a private language to a public language. And here again, I have a major disagreement with Wittgenstein. Normally, we're both Jews. Two Jews, three opinions. a major disagreement, because Wittgenstein famously denied the possibility of a private language. I think in the case of the self, there is always a private language which is then translated into a public language inefficiently, may I add. And so no single language can capture the self, because it is not self-referential, because it is always a derivative of the environment, of experience, of the world out there, of reality. The only way to relate to the self is to use two languages, the language of reality and the language of the dream. And so the self is a dream, not a figment of reality. It has nothing to do with reality, philosophically speaking. Many scholars have tried to somehow correlate the concepts of self with the concepts of dreaming and the concepts of reality, to make sense of the conundrum, of the dream argument, by studying the dreamer, as I said at the beginning. So, for example, there is a phenomenon known as vicarious dreaming. These are dreams where the protagonist of the dream is different to the dreamer. The person who is doing the dreaming is not the same person in the dream. This is very interesting because it raises the issue of identity and of the self. If in the dream you are not yourself, in which sense could the dream ever be perceived as reality? Can you dream another person? Or do you have perhaps a dream self and a reality self? And they're both independent, as Rosen and Sutton proposed. Of course, you can sit back with a good glass of wine and imagine that you are another person. But this is absolutely not like dreaming that you are another person. In the case of dreaming, the imagined person's thoughts, the thoughts of the person in the dream who is not you, are not framed as diverging from your own thoughts. You do not retain your own perspective in addition to the perspective of the other person, the imagined person in the dream. It's not like you have two perspectives. It's not like you have two frames of thoughts, of thinking. It's not like you have two sets of different cognitions. No. It's another person with your thinking, with your cognitions, with your emotions, with your reality. And so how can you become another person and yet retain everything you consider to be your identity or yourself? And this raises major questions. Taking off from this, remember all the time that, in my work at least, the self is a dream state. It's not reality. It's a dream state that refers to reality. We can then ask ourselves, if the self is a dream state, it's a dream state when you're awake and it's a dream state when you're asleep. The question then becomes, what is the difference between yourself? What are the differences between yourself when it is in a dream state and the very same self when it is awake? In other words, the question then becomes not what is the difference between reality and dreams, not what is the difference between the ability to tell apart reality from dreams, but what is the difference between the dreaming self and the wakeful self, being the same self. We know already that the self is a dream, is a dream state, at least in my work. So what happens to the dream, what happens to the self when the self is dreaming is natural, because the self is a dream state. It's natural for the self to dream. That's the default state of the self. Being awake is the abnormal state. Being awake is like a dream that wakes up and experiences reality. Being awake is when the self transitions from its normal natural state, which is dreaming, to an abnormal alien state, which is wakefulness. And it is abnormal and alien because the essence of the self is dreamlike. The self is a dream state. As I said, it's synthetic, it's a posteriori, it's non-falsifiable, and it uses translation, all the attributes and hallmarks of a dream rather than reality. It's a contradiction of reality. So we have a self that is a dream state, that dreams at night, which is the normal, natural thing for a dreamy entity to do, and then wakes up and has to adopt a mode, a modus, which is completely antagonistic to its very nature as a dream state. And this is very interesting because it's an inversion of how everyone used to see the situation until this very moment. Everyone would tell you, everyone, all the scholars, all the philosophers, they all said that the natural state of the self is reality. Whereas what I'm saying is, because the self has all the attributes of a dream, the natural state of the self is a dream, not reality. And when the self is forced to wake up biologically and confront reality, what the self does, it tries desperately to convert reality into a dream. Because the only language the self knows is the language of dreams. And it is forced to translate it into the language of reality. Reality becomes dreamlike in the eyes of the self, in the mind of the self, if you wish. Reality becomes dreamlike, and the self is busy trying to convert it into a dream, the natural state of the self. And so vicarious dreams raise a very problematic conundrum, because who is this other person in your dream? If it's not you, do you have two dreaming selves? Is this other person in your dream the real you, maybe? And the person during wakefulness, in waking time hours, that other person is not you. Maybe the person in your dream is the real you, and the person while you're awake is not you. And it raises the question of simulation. What I've just said, that the self is trying to convert reality into a dream because it in itself is made of dreams. It's a dream state. It means that the dream is trying to simulate reality. It's trying to simulate reality somehow, trying to convert it into a symbolic representation, into a computer code. The dreaming is immersive. It's here, it's now. The characters in the dream are present. It's like mindfulness, you know. The experience of the self in the world is also very, very now. Characters in dreams rarely have a past or a future. So many scholars who suggested that maybe dreaming is a form of simulation, the simulation view of dreaming, define dreaming as this immersive here and now character. And they suggested that there is no meaningful distinction between this and the experience of the self in the world. I tend to agree. I am not saying that I agree to the contention that reality is a simulation. So what I'm saying that the self, being a dream state, converts reality into something which is essentially a simulation of reality. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that our subjective experience is that of a simulation. I'm not making an ontological claim. I'm not saying that reality is a simulation. I'm saying the way we experience reality is most definitely a simulation. Different versions of the simulation view, they focus on different aspects of the self and the world experience in dreams. So there is what is known as social simulation, that is Rovonsuo. There's issues of selfhood in dreams, Metzinger, and so on and so forth. There are minimal conditions of experiencing yourself as a self in dreams. And these minimal conditions amount to what is known as the phenomenal selfhood. That's the work of Wind, W-I-N-D-T. Okay, I will not go into this branch of philosophy, although it's absolutely fascinating. So we're beginning to see where all this is leading. Dreams are definitely a simulation. A simulation. This simulation runs on hardware or wetware known as the brain. But the self is a dream state. And when it is forced to interact with reality, it converts reality into another simulation. Also, this simulation runs on the same hardware and the same wetware, the very same brain. And so, while there is a lack of agreement about the definition of dreaming and about what constitutes simulation in reality and in dreaming, there seems to be an emerging consensus that we are perceiving reality as a kind of simulation. Now, there's one camp that says if you're perceiving reality as a simulation, it must be a simulation. And there's another camp that says, let us not go into ontology. We are dealing with epistemology. Our knowledge of the world is simulated. It's a simulation. The aforementioned Rovonsuo described self-experience, including bodily experience in dreams, as identical to self-experiences in waking. And Metzinger and others, by the way, not only Metzinger, but Wind and others, they argued that important layers of waking self-experience are missing in non-lucid dreams. We are discussing right now non-lucid dreams. We will come to lucid dreams a bit later. Metzinger said, for example, that autobiographical memory, agency, a stable sense of first-person perspective, metacognitive insight, self-knowledge, they're all missing in dreams. And the fact that they are missing, their absence, can tell us if it's a dream or if it is a wakeful state in reality. He says that it is due to the cognitive and mnemonic deficit that characterizes non-lucid dreams that we can tell that it's a dream. And there's also work by Hobson, which says basically the same. Wind is a very interesting character. Wind analyzed the range of cognitive and bodily self-experience in dreams, and she described them as variable. She argued that in a majority of cases, dreams are weakly, phenomenally embodied states in which bodily experience is largely related to movement sensations, but a detailed and integrated body representation is lacking. Instead, bodily experience in dreams is largely indeterminate. There were even experiments that tried to test this hypothesis. I'm referring you to work by Gossel and others. Wind suggested that, proposed that dreams are weakly functionally embodied states. In other words, we usually dream when we're asleep. And when we're asleep, our bodies are inert, our bodies are down, and so on. Because our bodies are so lax and so lackadaisical, The experience of our bodies is very minimal. The specific pattern of body experience reflects altered processing of bodily sensations which are missing in sleep. In other words, she says that the state of sleep affects the characteristics of the dream and the minimalism of the dream. One could argue that the self experiences the dreams. It stands to reason, and it's a common denominator among almost all the scholars. There's a self that experiences the dream. And this self experiences the minimalism of the dream, and then it wakes up, and it has to cope with a lot of information from the aroused body, from the excitation states of a newly awakened body, and at the same time it has to cope with an avalanche of information from the environment. The only way for the self to cope with this, because the self is a dream state. Remember, in my work, we're talking about my work now. The self is a dream state. The only way for the self to cope with it is to filter out gigantic amounts of information. Studies show that we filter out 95% of the information we're exposed to, and then create on the fly theories about the remaining 5%, how to interpret visual sensa, a visual and auditory sensa, and so on. So there are models, mathematical models in the brain that do all this work. And this is a great description of a simulation. It's exactly what a simulation does. When we simulate, for example, weather patterns, what we do, we exclude a lot of information. We take the remaining information and we feed it into a mathematical model. And then we believe that it somehow captures and reflects reality. And this is exactly what the self does. Wind analyzed instances of bodiless dreams in which the dreamers said that they experience themselves as disembodied entities. And she said that self-experience can be reduced to pure spatio-temporal self-location. Like I'm here, but it's not my body. It's very reminiscent of dissociation, or more precisely, depersonalization, which is a form of dissociative disorder or dissociative defense. In depersonalization, which is a clinical feature, in depersonalization, the individual experiences the location and the environment and other facets of reality, but not his or her body. It's as if I'm here, but my body is not. Or my body is here and I am not, which is called derealization. We could therefore describe dreams as dissociative states of depersonalization and derealization. Why would we need to dissociate? Because we're asleep. Sleep is a very dangerous proposition because predators can take advantage of the fact that you're immobile and disabled and eat you alive or eat you asleep. So we need to dissociate. Otherwise, reality would be so terrifying that we would never be able to sleep. We dissociate the world, we dissociate reality. This dissociation of this depersonalization, this derealization may be experienced as what we call a dream. This is my proposition. This is my idea, not Wind. I don't want to misattribute anything to her. Wind proposed that these cases of disembodied dreaming can help us to identify the conditions for the emergence of minimal phenomenal selfhood. And other people carried on her work, Blank, Metzinger, and so on. Okay. We have to tackle, therefore, the issue of I'm sorry, I'm a bit tired. Verificationism, how to verify the difference between reality and dream. We need to verify that something is reality. We need to verify that another state is a dream state. We need to find what is known as differential features. So numerous scholars came up with all kinds of ideas. Some scholars says you have special signs in a dream that would never exist in reality. For example, impossible things which are not subjected to the laws of physics. Hobbes called it the absence of the absurd. In the dream, you have the absurd. In reality, there's the absence of the absurd. Descartes called it the coherence test in the very same meditations. So, in a dream, crazy things are happening, which are not um, real in the sense that they don't obey the laws of nature or the laws of physics, while in reality this never happens. Here's a distinguishing feature. Another possibility, the dream has, the reality, has special features. For example, it is linear, there's causation, there is sequentiality, and so on. And these are often missing in dreams. Both ideas are highly appealing intuitively. Unfortunately, they don't solve the problem. Because we do have dreams which resemble reality 100%, one-on-one, complete mapping. We do have dreams where things are linear, rational, causative, and obey all the laws of physics. We do have such dreams. We do have dreams that adhere to Descartes' coherence test, that are not absurd, that are sequential and linear. And so we do have dreams that appear to be completely real. These distinctions are not enough. If you have one case where a dream resembles reality and you cannot tell them apart, all other millions of cases are meaningless. It's like you say, all swans are white, and then a single black swan passes by, and your theorem, your statement, is fallacious. Okay, what about another idea? When we wake up, we connect with the rest of our life. We connect with the past, we even contemplate the future, we have episodic memory, autobiographical recall. When we wake up, we are connected. When we're a dream, the dream is dissociative, disjointed, and has no past and no future. Again, this is a part of Descartes' coherence test and Malcolm's coherence argument. This is something I will deal with in a minute. Then there is the answer that you are able to tell the difference between dreams and reality most of the time. It's a statistical test, first proposed, believe it or not, by Augustine. And of course, it's not a sufficient answer. Because as I said, if there's a single case, after trillions of cases, if there's a single case where nothing helps, and there's no way to tell the difference between the dream and reality, the whole edifice crumbles. Statistics is not good enough. We need to find something that holds water and is applicable in 100% of the cases, not 99.999, but 100. There is the answer that the difference between reality and dreams is that there are experiences unique to reality. This is Locke's pain argument. Like, the pain you experience in reality is qualitatively different to the pain you may experience or might experience in dreaming. Although Locke has denied completely that you could experience pain in dreaming. And erroneously, of course you can. But his surviving argument is that it would be qualitatively different to the kind of agony that you would suffer in reality. For example, if you were consumed by fire. And again, I will deal with it a bit later. And finally, Grundmann suggested that there is in dreams an absence of introspective critical thinking. In dreams, anything goes. You don't stop to think in the middle of a dream, is this likely? Is this reasonable? Is this rational? Could this even happen? You don't do that. And again, I'm not talking about lucid dreams. We'll talk about lucid dream a bit later. Okay? Dreams can meet all these tests and yet resemble wakefulness wakefulness to the fullest. That's the problem. These tests do not cover the totality of dreams extant and possible. We could conceive of dreams, and we do experience dreams that truly are indistinguishable from reality, obey all the laws of physics and nature, are sequential and linear and this and that. That's a problem. One example that most of us have experienced, when you dream that you are waking up, when you dream that you're waking up, the experience is as if you're back in reality. And then the new dream, this is nested dreaming, the new dream would be much closer to reality or would resemble reality completely. So you would have an initial primary dream that would be a bit unreal, would be a bit crazy, would be a bit absurd, and then you wake up in your dream. You don't really wake up. It's a dream of waking up. And then the new dream, the secondary dream, after you have woken up, so to speak, would be highly realistic. And we would mistake the dream, this second dream, for reality. This happens a lot in mental health conditions such as post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, I mentioned a few names and so on. I would like to dwell on a few major thinkers and see what we could make of what they have to say. Norman Malcolm in his monograph, Dreaming, published in 1959, he elaborated on the work of Wittgenstein. Wittgenstein asked whether does it really matter if people who tell dreams really had these images while they slept, or whether it merely seems to them on waking. And this was a quote from Wittgenstein. What Wittgenstein asked is, when people report their dreams, when they say, I've just dreamt this, does it really matter if they've actually had the dream, or if they just believe that they have had the dream? And so Malcolm wrote, and I'm quoting, the concept of dreaming is derived not from dreaming, but from descriptions of dreams. In other words, from the familiar phenomenon that we call telling a dream. If a man had certain thoughts and feelings in a dream, it no more follows that he had those thoughts and feelings while asleep than it follows from his having climbed a mountain in a dream that he climbed a mountain while asleep. And so what Malcolm argues is that the sentence "I'm asleep" is an impossible or senseless, nonsensical sentence, because you cannot report on your condition or your mental state when you're no longer there. It's like saying, "I'm dead." It's a meaningless sentence because when you're asleep, you're not. When you're asleep, you're not there. You don't have consciousness. So your report, "I'm asleep," is meaningless, and plus you would never be able to make it, of course. The only sentence you can say is, "I have been asleep," or "I was asleep," or I had slept. I had slept, I'm sorry. So "I'm asleep" is a meaningful sentence. And so dreams cannot exist independently of the waking impression of dreams. If sleep is a meaningless state, then any report about the sleep state is a meaningless report. The only meaningful reports which could make sense are reports about the wakefulness state. In other words, the report, "I had a dream," is meaningful because it is made in wakefulness. If there's no way to make this report when you're asleep, so dreams don't exist when you're asleep. They exist only when you wake up. He said that dream skepticism, this dream argument, comes from confusing the historical and dream-telling senses of the past tense. And so he wrote in his book, there was a chapter is titled, "Do I Know That I'm Awake?" And Malcolm argued that we do not have to say, "I know that I'm awake," simply because it would be absurd to deny that you're awake. The only time you can make statements that have any meaning and sense is when you're awake. So why make the statement "I'm awake"? Goes without saying. Actually, Malcolm was not the first to propose all these things. Maury, M-A-U-R-Y, in 1861, um, also alluded to this. But Maury in 61 and Gregory in 1916 suggested something very interesting. They said that when you wake up, there is an insertion of memory. Like when you wake up, you generate a memory about the dream. Now, it's very close to Malcolm. Malcolm says that the statement about having had a dream is the only meaningful thing, not the existence of a dream, which anyhow cannot be reported because you were asleep, you were not there. Maury and Gregory, and later the philosopher Daniel Dennett, suggested that when you wake up is when you actually create the dream. He called it the cassette type hypothesis of dreaming. Dennett said that dreams, or conjectured that dreams are not real conscious experiences. Dreams are pseudo-memories that emerge when you wake up from sleep. These pseudo-memories do not correspond to any real dream experiences. They are fabrications of experiences that have never occurred, according to Dennett. The cassette theory of Dennett says that dreams are the product of instantaneous memory insertions at the moment of awakening. As if there was some kind of cassette with, you remember cassettes? History. As if there was some kind of cassette with prescripted dreams. And these prescripted dreams have been inserted into memory, ready to be replayed. The aforementioned philosopher Jennifer Wind disagreed with Dennett, as do I, by the way. Disagreed with Dennett. She counter-argued that dream skepticism is in itself debunked. The dream argument is debunked. And a lot of her work was based on the psychology of lucid dreaming. She was the one who advanced the conceptual framework of dreaming as real imaginative experiences, because she studied lucid dreaming. I'll come to lucid dreaming in a few minutes. One more person I would like to mention is Wahlberg and his concept of personal horizon. He wrote a book titled Dream, Death, and the Self. Wahlberg attempted to bring out his subject matter by considering the dream hypothesis. In other words, whenever he dealt with some issue like the self or death or whatever, he asked the question, is it really a dream? Or what if this were a dream? And in this sense, Wahlberg's work is very close to mine, because in my work, the self is a dream state. And Wahlberg entertains this possibility, although he doesn't dare to go all the way, all 9 yards. Yeah? In Wahlberg's view, an indeterminate horizon would necessarily be internalized, would necessarily form a part of the unconscious. If there is a horizon, if there is something that is totally unclear, uncertain, and so on, like the uncertainty principle, if you wish, then it must be coming from the inside. It must be internal, as if this were all a dream. Whenever we are confronted with a reality that is indeterminate, cannot be reduced to certainties, it probably is coming from the inside. And in this sense, it's indistinguishable from a dream. Now we know in quantum mechanics that reality indeed is undeterministic, non-deterministic, indeed cannot be reduced to any certainty. Although I have my debate with this, but this is the prevailing view. Well, in this case, of course, everything is a dream, by definition. Wahlberg distinguishes between the subject of the dream, what he calls the dream self, and the sleeping person who is the dreamer of the dream and recalls it upon awakening. Wahlberg argues that awakening from a dream involves crossing some kind of abyss or chasm between discrete worlds, two discrete worlds, the world of the dream and the world of reality, with discrete spaces and discrete times. In other words, it doesn't make sense to say that the I at these times is and I'm quoting him now, it doesn't make sense to say that the I at these times is a single individual who crosses from one world to the other. According to Wahlberg, this is relevant to dream skepticism because there is no simple way to make sense of the claims that it is I who emerged from a dream or that I was the victim of dream deception. In other words, what Wahlberg is suggesting actually is that somehow there's a fragmentation of the self. It's the dreaming self, and there's the wakeful self, the reality-based and centered and immersed self, and they're not the same. So dream skepticism is meaningless because dream skepticism, the dream argument, assumes that it is the same self that relates to the dream and to reality. Now, of course, multiplication of entities is non-parsimonious and defies Occam's razor, so I wholeheartedly reject this part of Wahlberg's work. Also, I think it's not necessary, not needed. We could have a single self. Only this self would not be reality-based, as we had assumed hitherto. It would be dream-based. The minute we reconceive of the self as a dream entity, many paradoxes, and definitely the dream argument, are automatically resolved. Now I mentioned lucid dreaming. Lucid controlled dreaming, when the individual controls a dream, its content, its progression, the individual can wake up at will, start the dream, and terminate it per wish. Lucid dreaming is only one indication that dreams do exist. We have, of course, rapid eye movement, REM sleep, which occurs in the brain while you dream. We know that because when we wake up people with REM sleep, they report having been dreaming. We have dream enactment disorder, where the individual enacts the dream by walking and talking and everything. We have all these phenomena, and they prove, I think, that dreaming is a state of consciousness. It is a subjective experience. So I completely reject the work of Malcolm. I think it's completely counterfactual and flies in the face of everything we know scientifically. But if a dream is a state of consciousness, states of consciousness are founded on epistemological knowledge, justified knowing, or they're founded on beliefs, unjustified knowing. These are the two pillars of consciousness. Either you believe in something, but you cannot justify it, and then it's a belief, or you believe in something and you can justify it, and then it is knowledge. So, where do we classify and catalog dreams in this sense? They resemble hallucinations, illusions, mind-wandering, and imaginative experiences. But what are they? Are they forms of knowledge, or are they forms of beliefs? And this, of course, requires us to use the theory of justification in philosophy. But before I go there, Putnam noted that Malcolm's analysis of the concept of dreaming relies on the dubious idea that philosophers have access to deep conceptual truths that are hidden to lay people. Here's what Putnam had to say. The lexicographer would undoubtedly perceive the logical or semantical connection between being a pediatrician and being a doctor. But the same lexicographer would miss the allegedly logical character of the connection between dreams and waking impressions. This depth grammar kind of analyticity or logical dependence does not exist, said Putnam. Nagel agreed. He argued that even if one accepts Malcolm's analysis of the concept of dreaming, and I'm quoting, it is a mistake to invest the demonstration that it is impossible to have experiences while asleep with more import than it has. It's a very roundabout way of saying that it's nonsense. Nagel continues, it is an observation about our use of the word experience and no more. Let me help you here a bit. he says that the claim that it is impossible to have experiences while we are asleep is nonsensical. And it is a claim about our use of the word experience and no more. It does not imply that nothing goes on in our minds when we dream, said Nagel, preceding Putnam, actually. The difference between wakefulness and dreams is therefore a question of justification. How do we justify our beliefs and render them knowledge? The belief that we are awake, not dreaming. I'm going to repeat this because this is a key question. We have a belief. The belief is I'm awake. This belief can exist in dreams also, so it's not helpful with the dream argument. However, the justification of this belief can be helpful. If we are able to justify this belief in one set of circumstances and not able to justify it in another set of circumstances, then in the first set of circumstances, this belief is knowledge. If we are able to justify the belief, I'm awake, when I'm truly awake, but we are not able to justify this belief when we are dreaming, then the statement I'm awake in the first case is knowledge, and in the second case is mere belief. I'm going to summarize it for you, make your life easier. There's no theory of justification that I've tried that yields this outcome. In other words, justification is helpless in the face of the dream argument. But it doesn't mean that justification is helpless, period. Malcolm is the one who cast away justification. But justification doesn't have to depend on strict criteria with the help of which the truth of a statement can be determined with absolute certainty. In other words, this is a very high bar, that we must know something 100%, and that our arguments in themselves could be proven 100%. But we can justify, there's a weaker variant of justification. And Chihara and Fodor summed it up this way. We can justify by appealing to simplicity, plausibility, and predictive adequacy of an explanatory system as a whole. Now, I am closer to Malcolm in this sense. In my view, a justification such as this, the weak version of justification, is not a justification at all. In this view, behavioral and physiological evidence can be used to verify dream reports, and the alleged principal difference between dream reports and other first-person past tense psychological sentences disappears. So there's work by Ayer and Sigler and others to that effect. And to that extent, I agree. But we cannot use the same weaker version of justification to prove the distinction between dream state and wakefulness. It doesn't work, because there we have to be correct 100% of the time. If we're incorrect even once, there's a huge problem. Sosa said that in dreams, we make believe, we do not really believe. In reality, we really believe. I don't even understand this sentence, to be honest. The experience of belief in dreams is very real. I don't understand how could he say that in dreams we make believe? What? We sit back in a dream and say, now we're going to believe? This is sometimes, these scholars come up with extremely nonsensical sentences. And you have philosophers such as Jonathan Ichikawa and Nathan Ballantyne and Ian Evans and others. They say that dreams are imagined scenarios, not beliefs about the real world and wakefulness. And that's closer to reality. But even wakefulness, even the real world, could be imaginings, could be imaginary. If my theory is correct and the self is a dream state, it would make it very difficult to claim that the state of wakefulness yields qualitatively different data to the state of dreaming, in the sense that the state of dreaming is imaginary, the data there is imaginary, whereas the data in reality is not. If the interface with reality is a dream state, if the filter and membrane are dreamlike, if the conversion of reality to a simulation is via a dream entity, it's very likely that the information we are getting from reality is not qualitatively different and is highly imagined as the information we're getting from dreams. Zhuang wrote once, "The dreaming brain brings out the phenomenal level of organization in a clear and distinct form. Dreaming is phenomenality, pure and simple, untouched by external physical stimulation or behavioral activity." And this is, of course, completely untrue, as Wind had observed. Dreams are in touch with both the environment and with our body's proprioception. But what is true in what Zhuang said is that the dreaming brain is the closest we get to what we call consciousness. Not the brain when it interacts with reality. When the brain is interacting with reality, we are further away from who we truly are. We are further away from consciousness. The dreaming brain is relatively isolated from the exigencies and demands of reality, and therefore much closer to who we truly are. Again, it's an inversion of the way we used to see things hitherto. Because until now we said that when we are interacting with reality, we are the most conscious, and when we are dreaming, we are unconscious. I think it's exactly the opposite. We are conscious when we dream. We are becoming progressively less and less conscious as we wake up and have to face reality. This reality is a simulation, and a simulation that is essentially ultimately perceived as dreamlike by the self, which in itself is a dream state. And yet this simulated reality, this dreamlike reality that is translated, remember the translation, translated by the self, is not about us. So if you want to be a bit religious, you could say that when you dream, it's your individual consciousness, your idiosyncratic form of consciousness. And when you interact with reality, it's the consciousness of the world, or the consciousness of reality itself. Two types of consciousness, if you wish. But we are closest to ourselves when we dream. And finally, there's, of course, generative models and predictive processing models that tackled dreams. And I will quote a paragraph from Clark. He said that systems that know how to perceive an object as a cat are thus systems that ipso facto are able to use top-down cascade to bring about the kinds of activity pattern that would be characteristic of the presence of a cat. Perceivers like us, if this is correct, are inevitably potential dreamers and imaginers too. Moreover, they are beings who, in dreaming and imagining, are deploying many of the very same strategies and resources used in ordinary perception. I couldn't have said it better. I think the self is the bridge between dreaming and reality. I think what the self does, he translates dreams into reality and reality into dreams, and in this sense, the self is a language. The self is a dictionary. It's a translation mechanism. The self is sufficiently imbued with dreamlike attributes that it is able to interact with dreams in a meaningful manner. At the same time, the self is capable of interacting with reality and converting it into a simulation, into a dream state, because it possesses the language of reality. While the self perceives dreams as real, truly real, the essence, the core, who we are, our consciousness, the self actually perceives reality as feigned or a bit unreal. And needs, therefore, to convert it into a dream state in order to feel more real. The self is the language which we use to convert a reality that is utterly alien to us into a dream state with which we are intimately acquainted. It's a large language model and can be easily described as a form of artificial intelligence. It is reality that is perceived by the self as dreamlike, and dreams are perceived as real. And this bridge that the self builds between the two allows us, the dream creatures, to act upon reality and in it in a way that we can fulfill and realize our dreams and thereby actualize ourselves. Thank you for listening.